Great. So thanks everyone again. So what we'll do is start with some practice like we did last week, and then we will recite the refuges, generate our intention, and go back into our text. And I'll briefly review last week, and maybe even today I will do a little breakout rooms just to discuss, so you can discuss kind of amongst yourselves maybe what some takeaways were from you from last week's talk, maybe some things that you incorporated or were curious about or weren't sure about. And sometimes it's easier to discuss with your peers, and then maybe you can feel a little more comfortable to share your thoughts. So before we meditate, just as we did last week, I'm going to guide us into an embodied awareness practice. I have a lot to say about emphasizing embodiment. I think I can't remember, but I think I did talk about it last week. But I'm not going to say too much right now. But what I would like to do is just recommend that this becomes, a core part of our lojong practice. Because for me, when I'm working with lojong, like I think I did say last week, it can have the tendency, due to our maybe dominant behavior, where we tend to go to the thinking mind or the strategies of the thinking mind to figure out how we live in the world and move through it and live with our emotions and move through them. And sometimes for some of us, this can leave out the body. When we're working with lojong, we're working with our emotions, we're working with our thoughts, we're working with our relationships, communication, how we're perceiving reality. And so for me, that kind of first step is orienting to the body and giving some space to meet what's arising. And this can help in the process of lojong, as opposed to just going to sort of trying to figure out how to relate, which to me can provide sometimes, unfortunately, a disconnect. So that's why I'm starting with this kind of embodied awareness practice as a way to cultivate this. If it's newer to you, or if it's something really familiar, just to continue to cultivate. It's something I'm doing every day in my practice. It's just kind of become a part of my routine. So without any further ado, go ahead and find a posture that feels good to you, something that you can feel relaxed in, yet alert. So the alert is important, keeping the back straight, shoulders back and down, just allowing the body to become alert, but also not to be tense. So see if you can relax into that alert posture. Just kind of moving the body a bit in that posture, settling into it more, just allowing your attention and awareness to find the space of the body a little bit more. And I'm going to guide it in a second, but just maybe doing that for yourself, wherever you feel drawn to in the body. And noticing where you feel drawn to is also part of the process, because sometimes we feel automatically drawn up to the head, or sometimes we automatically go to like a more painful place and get stuck there. Sometimes we orient somewhere else, and sometimes we don't have a choice. We just sort of go wherever we're taken. Just noticing that. And then from there, we're going to orient to our feet. And you can close your eyes if you'd like, or leave them open, whatever feels good to you. A lot of lineage-based Buddhism, we meditate with our eyes half open or fully open, whatever feels comfortable. We're just going to orient to our feet. If you're sitting in a chair, just allowing the feet to be flat on the floor. Connected to earth, the ground below you. If you're sitting cross-legged, connecting to every part of your body that is present with the ground or your cushion or seat. Feeling feet, the calves, knees, legs, sits bones. And so since I'm going to not take a huge leap in assuming that we're all meditators here, with some experience. Just allowing your awareness, which is the aspect of our mind that can be watchful of our experience, quality of knowing, but of kind of backdrop of knowing, that knows we're knowing. This awareness simply bears witness to the feeling in the body, but not in a cold way. So we continue to feel the feet, feel the legs, feel our connection to the earth. Just bringing in something a little bit outside the written or scriptural Buddhist tradition, though you actually do find it as one of the first things the Buddha did, where he touched the earth and the earth shook in recognition of his enlightenment. Here, relating to the earth and our connection to it, being aware of our experience as our sensations arise and shift, being aware of this connection to the earth we're sitting on via either the chair, cushion, or directly on the floor. Connecting to the earth as probably our most primordial relationship. Something we're pretty much always in relationship to, unless we're maybe in a plane. And then, of course, there's still a relationship to it. Being in the sky is dependent upon not being on the earth. Just connecting to this relationally now, and maybe even recognizing this as a home you can relax on. So there's a sense of relationship, maybe even trust we can develop here, that the earth has held us this long and has borne witness to our life this long, and can also bear witness to our practice. Like I said, with the Buddha in his enlightenment life story, the earth was his witness to his enlightenment, as it will be for ours. So just allowing your body to rest on it, and if you like, extending the body into it without leaving your body. Just allowing this to offer a sense of grounding for you. And of course, this connects into our Buddhist meditation practice as a practice of awareness. We're still training the mind in being present and aware via the body, via the earth. I'm just going to sit with this for a few minutes, letting that experience expand for you, whatever way feels good this morning. Now, as you continue to sit with the body on the earth, being aware of the sensations in the body, the lower body, your connection to the ground below. You can invite the breath in if you'd like, if that's a helpful tool for you in your practice. Breathing in from the nose, we breathe up from the earth into the body, up through the feet, up through the legs, maybe into the abdomen. And breathing down, we just allow the body to rest on the earth, to be held. So there's a sense of release that we can practice right now, but also a sense of connection to ourselves, our sensations, emotions, our bodies, this earth we all share together, to each other. And this capacity of awareness of mind simply just knows that experience, is mindful or watchful of that experience. So when we take away the product-oriented or kind of mentality of producing through meditation, we can actually cultivate being within the meditation. We can cultivate kind of an element of awareness, but we're awareing. So it's an active, engaged practice as opposed to just sort of setting this expectation of calm or concentrated or whatever we're trying to do. But there's still, of course, that intention of heartfulness, love, bodhicitta, awakening. But when we take out the goal-oriented meditation, we can actually just experience what is, which maybe for some of you isn't so comfortable this morning. And I want to just invite an extra presence to that, a sense of kindness to that experience, that it's allowed if it's not too overwhelming. It's welcome. And can you welcome that? Can you also love that which arises that's uncomfortable? And I love to make a distinction here for myself. This doesn't mean love it into comfort. It means love it in whatever way it wants to arise. Allow. So perhaps at this point you can allow the breath to expand into the rest of the body, allowing more of a full body breathing, or if you've just been simply relating to sensation, allowing just full awareness of the body as it's felt right now, whatever arises within it. Just allowing what's arising to come, to abide, and to dissipate in its own time. But like I said, we're practicing a connective felt awareness. Perhaps even allowing our heart to soften naturally to what's being experienced. Just softening to the moment. As we keep allowing presence to unfold. So if we're used to a more traditional shamatha practice, here's where we can start to allow shamatha more directly to unfold. So you may notice I'm not using words like concentration or effort or striving. Yet, of course, it still requires effort to come back to the body. It still requires engaging our own sense of agency to be aware. Whatever you need this morning, let that happen in a way that's working with this spectrum of allowing the loosening of any constrictions, tightness in our experience, and how we think our practice should be or go. And then, of course, increasing our effort in a constructive way when we find ourselves distracted, away from the body, caught in our narratives and stories and spinning thoughts. Just drop back into the feeling of the body, into just a sense of aware, clear nowness. And just continue to cultivate and rest in that, in the body, with the breath, with the earth. So whatever you've been making contact with during the practice so far, maybe a little bit more space came in to your being. Maybe it didn't, but either way, we're going to start to allow inner space that maybe we've connected with to connect with the outer space. So whether your eyes are closed or open, just beginning to sense the space around you without leaving your body. So there's a sense of embodiment, of connection to our sensations, feelings, emotions in the body. This continued connection to the ground below us. We're just going to allow that to expand to meet the room we're in, the environment in. And as you do that, make sure to stay within the body and continue that grounded spaciousness we've been cultivating. And now we meet the walls, the furniture, the ceiling, any other beings in the room with us, around us. And so that inner space, groundedness we've been cultivating in the body, allow that to simply just become more of a transparent experience with the outer space. We're just going to continue to rest in that with a sense of awareness. At this point, it can be helpful to open the eyes to continue the practice that way if you want to try that. Within this space, sitting within our bodies, the room, wherever we're currently residing, whatever environment we're in. Just before we close the practice, allowing connection to the heart. So of course we can begin to attune to the physical space of the energetic heart in the middle of the chest. If you want to place one hand there to connect with that. Or it's just connecting with this sense of humanity, or a sense of rawness, maybe even our sense of vulnerabilities as a human being. And this heart that can open and be available to ourselves and others as a sense of warmth, a sense of connection, a sense of care. And just sensing that in the body. So not just the thought of that, attempting to feel that, and depending on our maybe mood this morning or how much we cultivate this regularly, there's a spectrum of this. So just connect with whatever you can connect with right now. Don't worry if it's not too strong or feel like, oh, I can't sense that. Actually, the fact that we're all here to discuss and learn and practice lojong, the mind training teachings, it's evidence that we have love for ourselves, for others. Right now, we're just connecting with that sense of inward love, the home of love. That doesn't necessarily have to be expressed towards anyone or anything at the moment, just within ourselves, sitting within that. So just allowing the practice to slowly rest. What you may notice as you start to look around the room or move the body a little bit is quite a gentle awareness, a very subtle but useful practice that can allow us to extend the practice back into the day. So it's not just like we're doing something and then we're done. So we're like, what's it like to look around the room now, but stay present with the body, stay present with the seat below you. Kind of maybe to open to some unknowns. What's going to happen for the next hour and a half? What are you going to feel? What are you going to think? What am I going to say? I actually don't know yet. I mean, I have some notes. So I'm jumping into the abyss of the unknown with you as well, right? So thanks everyone for your practice. If you want to go ahead and turn your videos on, that'd be great if you want to. Would love to see you. So I think what we'll do is chant Refuge in Bodhichitta and the mandala offering again, just like we did last week. I did explain the chants a little bit. So if you're joining us, if you weren't here last week, you can listen to that if you want to know kind of how I like to frame these chants. Of course, when we get teachings on refuge and bodhicitta, we understand the meaning of what we're doing through the chants more. But I think there's some other elements that just come out over time experientially. And yeah, I talked a little bit about that last week. All right, so we'll do refuge and bodhicitta first, which I think is, oh, I see, it's below the mandala offering. So we'll recite it in Tibetan once and English twice. Here, if you're a practicing Buddhist, you can visualize the Buddha in front of you, or we'll call the merit field of our teachers in Lineage. Sangye chodan sogi chonam ma chanshu bardo dani kyapso chi dagi chenyen gi pe sonam gi chona penshir sangye choparsho. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Mandala offering. Saji Perki Jushin Meto Cham Shira Lingji Nide Kempadi Sangye Jindu Mikte Uwargi Chokun Namda Jinla Choparsho. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirataya. Okay. It's always kind of astounding when I don't know how it is in your lives, but when you look in a certain way, we can see things we never saw before. So like, you know, when we look from the mind of and the heart of love, you can see it actually weaved in the chants. You know, like the whole chant is actually there's this thread of love throughout it. You know, when we're taking refuge, when we're generating bodhicitta, of course, and then the mandala offering is just this offering, wishing this kind of all beings can experience their innate potential for Buddhahood fully in this display of the mandala, right? In this display of a pure place. When we get into the third turning of the wheel of the Buddha, and then of course the tantric teachings, the notion is that actually what we're perceiving is based on our human body, but actually what it is a pure land in a sense. And this word pure is a tricky one, because I think some people might take that through a Judeo-Christian lens, but in Buddhism it actually just means free of constructs, free of duality, free of kind of suffering and happiness. And then that displays in this certain way as, Sambhogakaya realms and all these things. Anyways, different class, but I was just kind of inspired to say that. So, awesome. So we have our lojong teaching class, etc. I really enjoyed last weekend, by the way, last Saturday. There's a lot of reflections for me from you all, just engaging with you all a little bit and just sort of reflecting on the teachings more and more. I thought what I'd do is review a little bit, and then we'll see where we proceed from there. We did start with verse 1 last week, though I didn't really repeat the verse until the very end, which is sometimes it's my style. But of course, we did talk about it. So verse 1, what we were focusing on last week, which we're going to continue today, is determined to accomplish all success. I shall always practice holding dear all sentient beings who are more precious than wish-fulfilling gems. So this is really setting up our text, and really the main point of this text, which is to train the mind in bodhicitta, to train the mind in aspirational bodhicitta, which I'll describe more today, in engaging bodhicitta, and the mind of awakening that's interconnected or inseparable with a heart of love and compassion, and what that means and how to do that. So last week we really focused on meaning making and what that means from a Buddhist perspective, and kind of this play of what appears to us in our human experience, and how we are struggling often with these elements of happiness and suffering, and the sort of dichotomy of that in our life, and how that is, in a sense, represented by this term samsara, which just means to circle. So we're in a sense circling, where we might think it's quite a linear process, but it's not. It's sort of just circling in the habits of mind again and again, and habits of temporary happiness, habits of levels of dissatisfaction, suffering, pain. And that's a large understanding, that's a large topic of how we frame making meaning or making life meaningful within Buddhism. So like I said last week, some people might find that odd in the beginning when you're first studying it, because it's like, wait, why are we talking about something painful in order to make meaning in life? And I think here, there's many ways the Buddhists frame this. There's many ways we could talk about it. But for me lately, and just my own experience, this is all about if I'm not relating to my full experience in the body, in the mind, in my relationships, in everything I perceive, including painful experiences, there's kind of an element of disconnect. There's an element of actually not being present to reality. And so one of the gifts of coronavirus is, for many of us who were kind of, how to put this, maybe consciously and unconsciously sort of ignoring what reality is, it kind of has brought it, face to face with us. Because really, what is coronavirus on an existential level? It's death. It's having to grapple with death. It's having to grapple with that this body is inevitably going to end our experience in this body. Yet the Buddhist approach to this, when we're discussing making meaning of life, is not that it's an end, all we've got is this. The Buddhist approach is so optimistic, actually, I think. So even though we are talking about making meaning via looking towards all of life's experiences, including painful experiences, and learning to allow those to sit within our heart and to move through us and through our relationships and communities, and to try to, of course, make better circumstances for ourselves and others. So although that's there, the optimism is that our mind is beginningless and endless. So our consciousness is beginningless and endless, and that consciousness that is beginningless and endless is free at its root. So this is really what the Buddha taught in the third turning of the wheel, through Maitreya and on the teachings on Buddha nature, that we already have this gold. We already have this element of mind and being that's free, and yet we become confused about that, and therefore suffering comes. So meaning making from a Buddhist perspective is just actually engaging a path, engaging a relational path in order to bring about the qualities of that Buddha nature. To, on one side we could talk about cultivating them, on another side we could talk about just allowing them to be uncovered or manifest. So this is quite a beautiful thing. To me, this is probably the best news I've ever gotten in my lifetime, that I'm not inherently screwed up. And this is really what the teachings on Buddha nature are saying. That's why I always like to remind us of them and talk about them. Now, just the idea of that can be helpful, I think, sometimes, but of course, for most of us, it's not enough. Meaning, like, sure, that's a nice idea, we might think, but how does that relate to my experience? So, of course, we could go more into that if you want. But here in the lojong teachings, it does relate to our experience in that we're cultivating directly that Buddha nature via loving kindness, compassion, patience, and bodhicitta, right? This mind of bodhicitta. So in the first verse, the translator chose to translate this, with the word success, determined to accomplish all success. So this is essentially, success from my perspective, the way I've studied, interpreted or sort of experienced Buddhism, is success is all around how are we awakening to this full potential of our Buddha nature, which is innate, which is the ground of our being. And so success, and this is tricky because then, of course, this is a nuanced conversation where it's like, well, do we define success by like how much bodhisattva activity we're doing in the world? In quotes, I put that in quotes on purpose. Do we define success in sort of like how much we're spreading the Dharma, or how much people love what we share with them about the Dharma, or whatever? Do we define it in sort of, we can go even lower than that. Do we define it in how much money we make, or how successful we've been materially in our life? So again, here, of course, like, success is a range, but to me what this is really talking about is how much have we grown this interconnected bodhi bodhi heart, right? This heart of bodhicitta. So you'll notice the way I'm going to talk about it. Sure, when we could say mind of bodhicitta or heart of bodhicitta, to me they're really interchangeable, because when we're talking about mind in Buddhism, we're also talking about heart. So even the term chitta can have this element of like a heart mind. Like, they don't make that linear distinction so much in heritage-based Buddhist cultures. So I think we have to learn what that means, because in our dominant culture, there is a large separation between that. And not only a separation between mind and heart, but there's a separation in mind being material versus immaterial, right? And this is a big thing we have to work out. And maybe we think we've worked it out for ourselves, but actually our culture and societies and the way we've been educated and the milieu we're in, it really conditions us a lot. I've noticed that for me, this element of sort of where I've been conditioned to very hypercritical thinking. It's very useful for certain things in the Dharma, but it's also done a disservice to me of cutting me off from my heart. And so I've had to put an emphasis on making that relationship a little bit more stable. And so sometimes when we're using this languaging in lojong, we have to see, well, what lens am I taking this in through? So that's the curious, more open process I'm inviting you into with yourself, right? I mean, and together as a group as well. This process of like, how are we hearing these terms? How are we relating to it? You know, even when we go into verse 2 and 3, the language in here can be heavily misinterpreted. You know, I already spoke about that, how, you know, finding our home and our ground of well-being is really important before we engage lojong, or at least we're doing it concurrently with lojong. So success is we could sum it up as sort of like how much bodhicitta we're developing and working on or have developed, this awakened mind, our innate potential. But that's so hard to pin down in our current cultural milieu, because you might have someone who's totally useless from a modern, you know, late stage capitalist perspective, just living in her hut, you know, somewhere in New Mexico in the desert, whatever. She's got a cat, she's got a couple friends, and she's done the work on her bodhi heart, on her bodhi mind, and it's there. But it doesn't necessarily come out as, you know, she's got a whole online program and a, you know, $1,000 $10,000 website and touring around the world and all that kind of stuff. She's just there, you know. Whoever she meets benefits from her wisdom. Whoever she meets, it awakens their bodhi mind. There's people like this out there. They exist in Tibetan culture. I'm sure they exist in indigenous cultures in the United States and South America. And they exist probably amongst us, just so maybe even some people we know. We just wouldn't know it because they're just simple, and they have nothing to prove, right? They don't have big names. They're not big lamas or anything like that. No, I will say, it also, big lamas who are really famous can also have this too, right? They're just manifesting it in their activity at that point. So it's a tricky thing, because how do we define success? Because if we can't define it outwardly, we have to learn how to define that inwardly, which I would say is it's not a linear process, at least for me. So then this second part of the verse, which I'm just kind of recapping last week through it, I shall always practice holding dear all sentient beings who are more precious than wish-fulfilling gems. So this is really coming to the essence or the core of what we're doing with the lojong teachings, of what we're training the mind in, right? Which is this process of holding all sentient beings dear, because from a perspective of training the mind in bodhicitta, it's via sentient beings that we actually grow our awakening, or that we uncover or cultivate awakening. If there was no sentient beings around us, we wouldn't be able to become awakened. This is sort of what the Mahayana teachings talk about. There's this debate sometimes, you know, whether samsara will end or not. Of course, it can end for us. There's no question about that. If we keep practicing, if we keep engaging life after life, we can attain awakening, no question. But there's this debate whether samsara will end, because if samsara, what does the last person do in samsara? Because from a Mahayana perspective, they need another sentient being to cultivate awakening via. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's a fun debate. Sometimes I hear lamas debate it. I actually think I'm not too worried about that personally, but at the same time, I'm sure something will get worked out. I'm sure some Buddha will manifest, some really difficult person to work with, so that person can get enlightened. I'm sure that'll happen. I'm not too worried about that. But either way, it also kind of gets into more teachings on what samsara actually is, some deeper teachings on that. But nonetheless, we can end our own samsara, and therefore, if we use our relationships and relate with others in this way of working with them as precious gems, not only does it, of course, help our relationships and help us to cultivate more love and compassion and connection with others, it also can benefit our path of enlightenment, and of course theirs, right? So this is really the heart of bodhicitta, cultivating this practice of holding all sentient beings dear as if they were wish-fulfilling gems. So what I'd like to do now, just having kind of recapped that is, so those of you who have your video off, I'm going to ask you to turn it on when we go into, so if your hair's not done, maybe take a few minutes to do that and comb it real quick. I'm going to ask you to turn your video on because we're going to do some breakout rooms right now. And I realize this isn't like something everyone likes to do. Some people love it and love to kind of chat it up with people on Zoom. Some people are like, oh man, I just wanted to sit here and not talk. And, you know, we're all on a scale of introvert, extrovert. I'm kind of on that, you know, I'm kind of like an introverted extrovert or something. I don't know. So I get it, right? So in the spirit of lojong, I'm sort of inviting us into a relational practice. So this isn't just sort of like time for chit chat. It's really a relational practice of discussing your own relationship to these teachings, your own relationship to what we talked about last week. So I don't have a specific prompt, but what I wanted to throw out there is from last week, anything that sparked for you in our discussion that maybe you brought into your practice throughout the week, maybe just today, just reviewing a little bit, something that sparked for you. And you can go back and forth, and we'll do it for 10 minutes, or actually, because we're such a small group, we're gonna probably break into just pairs, so one and one. We'll probably take a little over 5 minutes. So just if you tend to speak a lot, just be aware of that, and just maybe even time yourself if you tend to speak a lot. So like 3-4 minutes each, something like that. And it can be flexible, and of course, feel free to share as you want. But yeah, that's the idea. Just share how these teachings are what we discussed last week or just now are kind of generative for you. What's arising within you? And that also means challenges, if you feel like sharing that with the other person. It doesn't always mean sort of like all the juicy, kind of aspirational stuff. Just like the on the ground challenges too. I think that's fine, as long as your partner is willing to listen to that. So yeah, I think what we'll do, Mary, hopefully, so what we'll do is go into breakout rooms. Let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 with Mary. So yeah, so we have an odd number. Mary, do you mind going into one of the pairs? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I can't hear you, but anyways, so we got an equal number. We got 5 and 5. So perfect. So yeah, so I think just Mary will pair you off, and then yeah, once it starts, let's see. So yeah, like I said, 3 or 4 minutes each, and we'll just give a warning in the breakout room when we're going to come back. All right, I don't know if Mary can go because she might need to give the prompts. Anywho, it's all good, Mary? Okay. So it'll probably, it should prompt you when Mary's got it set up where it'll say, join your breakout room. And you just click that and then it'll go.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, you just muted yourself, Mary.
Almost done. It's hard for me I can't assign myself to a room.
Okay, you can, you could put 3 people in one.
Okay, yep, here I go.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody, hold on one more second. Damn. Never done this before.
I always like when people come back from the breakout rooms happy.
That was cool.
Good.
Way cool.
Good.
Mary, thanks for making that happen. I know it's hard the first time.
Oh yeah, yes, with Scott's tutelage, it was fabulous.
Thanks, everyone. I was just saying, I love when breakout rooms, when everybody comes back with a smile on their face. That's always a nice sign. So maybe what we can do is talk a little bit as an entire group. I do want to get into the verse 2 and 3 today, but just for a few minutes we can chat. I mean, what I'm curious, what came up for all of you? What was something that came out of the teachings? And one thing
don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. I was going to say one thing too. If you're going to share someone else's experience, I would say focus on your own experience, and then, maybe don't share theirs unless they said it was okay. Sorry, now that I made you more shy.
You can sing it if you'd like.
Well, the three of us talked about mindfulness, and in particular how we put it into practice, or try to put it into practice daily at work, if you will. And three vastly different professions, all of which benefit from being more present in the moment as we interact with the people we're interacting with.
Cool.
That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just something that came up for you in the conversation?
I was talking about, and we were talking about, but for myself, it was about how lapsing into getting down and depressed because I'm taking things very personally with in an interaction, with friends, where there's no reason for me to be taking it personally, just not, get into feeling sad or something about a friendship relationship when that person doesn't get back to me when they say they're going to get back to me. And it's just, some people are caught up in all kinds of stuff, either under normal conditions and these abnormal conditions. So that led into us talking about how, thinking about other people and Tonglen and Lojong, just help with that. And it was just something that was close to me because it just came up yesterday, but I'm aware of it when it's happening. And that's the great thing about training and, and studying the Dharma. Just the awareness as it's happening doesn't necessarily get rid of the feeling at all, but it's being aware of what I'm doing, and it's good. It's good, and just to be able to share that in the breakout room.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Good
you.
stuff. Good reflections. Thanks for sharing that.
We kind of talked about a little bit of what I mentioned last week, that you said about being too rigid with our practice and being in a box, and how we've all kind of been there a little bit. And it's almost like now we have permission, and especially today when you're talking about the heart, how we want to bring more of the heart in, not just the intellectual. I mean, and Robina, Venerable Robina, actually has said about, I'm not Asian. So the cultural stuff is hard to bring in. So it's almost like having permission to settle in our body, but with our heart, and not be so intellectual and so rigid about things. And the other thing for me from last week is I love to go out early and walk in the morning, and I come home and try to do meditation. And you mentioned that you found your space out in nature, and I thought, wow, I used to do that. So I've been doing that again this week. And up here in Los Alamos, you can walk on these various trails, and there are rock outlets that you can kind of hide in, right? So I do my walk, and then I come back and I can really settle in. And it's beautiful to just be doing that out with the birds, and it's great. So that's something I brought into this week, is trying to get back to that. And I think that kind of gets back in our hearts too. It's being out there. So that was
cool.
art.
Thanks, Nancy. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Beautiful. Yeah, now you got me thinking, oh yeah, I haven't sat on the earth for a few days. I need to do it now. Anything else? Maybe if there's one more person who has something. If not, it's also okay.
I'll just add one thing that I'm finding really helpful or useful is to actually think about what success means. The personal, what at this point in my life, what do I want that to be? And to be intentional about it. And but I don't know. I'm just looking. I find that really useful now, but looking forward to that as we go through the rest of the series. And I think it will be helpful with that.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it. I love all the reflections. Yeah, this one around success is so interesting because, again, we're going to define it from a lojong perspective or from a Mahayana Buddhist perspective. But I think then it's sort of like, I want to talk about this hidden element of like, well, then we can set it as a goal and it becomes this kind of thing, when actually it's more about this less linear approach of interconnection that we're developing, and of course awakening and wisdom, wisdom of emptiness. There was but as far as success goes, I think it's interesting because I think we all go through stages in our life where we reassess what success is for us. I mean, when I was a monk from age 28 to 37. And before I was a monk, I was a recording engineer, recording bands in San Francisco and musicians. And I remember kind of earlier in my teens and early 20s, success for me was like I wanted to be like a touring musician, a well-known musician, like something around like being seen and heard was more the success. But when I became a recording engineer, it was more around like, well, can I pay the bills doing this? And that was like how I had changed my version of success in the music business, was like, can I actually live and enjoy and create with people and can do that full time? And of course, as Dharma practitioners, we define it differently. But there was a definition I really loved. There's a great interview online. I forget her last name. There's a Oglala Sioux indigenous woman. Her name's Loretta Afraid of Bear, but I forget her. Afraid of Bear is her indigenous name, I think, but I forget her last name. I think she lives I don't know where she lives, maybe Northern California or maybe close to the Black Hills in Sioux country. Anyways, she said, like there's a website, I went to go look up her things, and it said it didn't say anything about her being a spiritual teacher or doing any of the work she does, which seems like beautiful work with people, both indigenous and non-indigenous. But she said, I'm working on being a grandmother. And like, so her, like, again, I doubt she's using the word success in that, but she was kind of just stating like, I'm just enjoying and working with being a grandmother. And I thought, wow, that's so beautiful, because it's like part of her spiritual path is being a grandmother and all that means. And of course, in her tradition, being a grandmother also means the wisdom one's developed over the years to then share with others in the community. So anyways, thanks for that. It's Anne, yeah. Anne, I think Anne. Cool. So let's dig into our verses a little bit and kind of go where I wanted to take our talk today. I think, Mary, we settled on this title, right? Cultivate Universal Citizenship and Community for today. I believe that's how I titled it. And as some of you who have studied lojong before in like a more traditional Tibetan Buddhist format may have already noticed, like, what does universal citizenship have to do with lojong? You might already be sort of wondering, what does he mean by that? What's he going to say? And so this is kind of another element of how I wanted to set up an approach to practicing lojong and Mahayana Buddhism in general. So this idea of universal citizenship and community, it can mean a lot of different things. But to me, this word, I want to center around this word universal. And in a sense, when we're cultivating this bodhicitta, this heart of altruism, this heart mind that's awake, that's engaged, that's willing to sit with a broken heart for the suffering of oneself and the world. There's a sense of universality that starts to develop, not in our thinking. Our thinking and our way of interacting can actually be quite specific, meaning like universality can actually be harmful sometimes when we just universalize, like, for instance, like all lives matter is a harmful way to speak to people, because it's not acknowledging the essence of the specificity of racism in America, that being an example, right? By saying Black Lives Matter, no one means others don't matter. It's just making a specific point to bring to center the suffering of Black-bodied people in this country for the last 400 plus years, and what that means and what that implies for all of us, right? So that's just one example of how if we use universality in the negative, it can diminish other people's experience, right? So here, what I mean by it is more, we're opening into a sense of connection, and that connection is universal, meaning we're starting to come into this attitude that, yes, I want to be happy. Yes, I want suffering. Sorry, yes, I want to eliminate suffering for myself. I want to eliminate the causes of suffering. I want to come into the causes of happiness for myself, but so do all others. And we start to meditate on that. We start to reflect on that. And we start to see, okay, and the more we reflect, the more we see how others are really no different than ourselves in that category, right? They can be very different in other categories and have other needs than ourselves. And that's also really important too. And that's what I meant by the specificity. Sometimes Dharma in the West is at the risk of becoming too universal, in the sense of like, oh, well, everybody wants happiness, blah, blah, blah. And then we assume everybody needs the same kind of approach to happiness as us on a relative level. And that's just not true. And that's what I meant by sort of this element of, we could say Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, as a way to understand what Black-bodied people need in this country is going to be different than those of us who are white-bodied, because they haven't had access to the same, for instance, like many things as we have. But one thing I can mention is just being able to cultivate generational wealth that's been systematically denied to them, right? Not even to sort of talk about indigenous issues or other issues. And we also have our own issues, right? Whatever culture, ethnicity we come from. But nonetheless, how do we hold those specificities with compassion and wisdom, but at the same time universalize our warmth, our compassion, our sense of seeing the heart and actually suffering of all beings? And that's part of what we're doing here. So to me, that's a quality of citizenship, because it's not a quality of me doing that for another person. That's a quality of me engaging in a way internally to then exchange or embody externally with others the sense of being a citizen of this world together, a citizen of this earth. It also kind of even, when we're talking about, again, I'm bringing up some social issues today, but just as examples, right? When we're talking about climate justice or climate change and how to deal with that, it's also this same approach, because like, if I'm a citizen of this world, I don't have to go and fix the world, right? It's not that I have to go and rescue like my climate changes and what I do to augment my behavior to or any activism or any kind of like politicians I want to support in their policies towards better climate change policy. This doesn't have to be an act that's done to sort of rescue something or save something. This was actually a point on this teaching from this Galala Sioux woman. It's actually quite a colonizing attitude to think that we're going to save the world or we're going to kind of rescue the world. No, like we're the ones who are in trouble. The world's not in trouble. Like we're the ones who are at the possibility of going extinct as human beings. And so it's more like this recognition of being a citizen of the world together as human beings on a relative level, and a citizen of the world to be a good community member. Like, what does that mean? How do we learn to do that? If we forgot, how do we relearn to do that as cultures and societies? So again, these are just relative issues. But then when we get into this ultimate side of the nature of the world, the nature of mind, the nature of phenomena, how in the Mahayana Buddhism, when we're talking about bodhicitta, we're always merging that with wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness. So this relative and ultimate has to come together eventually for us. This universality and citizenship also blends into an understanding and experience of our interdependence, right? And our interdependence on a relative level, like that what I do matters, what I do affects you, right? They call it the butterfly effect, I think. I've heard that before. What you do affects me. But also on another level, there's this interdependence that when we look into the wisdom nature of ourselves and others and the world, we can't find a locus point where I sort of begin and end and you start and end, right? But that also doesn't mean we're the same. So we have to also talk about this when we're talking about universal citizenship and community. I think we're at this really interesting crux where in one way, the relative forms of systems and how we're embodied and how we're engaging in the world can be so constricted and our views around them can tighten so much that we squeeze the life out of any movement in a beneficial way. So I think one aspect of coming into non-duality is not to deny the relative systems, not to deny that some people are struggling more than us for good reason, for systemic reasons, right? And again, we're a diverse group here, so I want to acknowledge, it doesn't mean every single person in this group, we're all having our different experiences. But just using that as an example, that can be acknowledged, and at the same time, we can still come into a sense of non-duality as an activator to bring agency to how we become a citizen in the world. So through Bodhichitta, I'm just kind of introducing a topic that's going to come in the last verse, which is the verse on emptiness. It's really the 7th or 8th verse, I think, the 8th verse. Universal citizenship and community develops through opening the heart, through connecting to ourselves, allowing our heart to open, allowing that to intersect with others, and then of course training in these lojong teachings as well as other Mahayana teachings. But it also involves non-duality, and this is where I think non-duality gets a bad rap sometimes, because what some people do with non-duality is they check out and they think, well, the relative doesn't matter then. But in Buddhism, when we're talking about non-duality and emptiness, it actually proves that things matter more, because what we're talking about is interdependence. And so then how do we weave the inseparability of the way the relative world functions, the way systems function, our minds function, our speech, our patterns of behavior, all of that, karma, all that relationship, how do we weave that with some fluidity? So the non-duality is there to remember that that ice is originally water. And that's necessary to act from the perspective of bodhicitta. So being a bodhisattva or cultivating that is not just the wish to be a good person. It's actually a little bit bigger than that. It's the wish to be a free person in the service of others. And what freedom means from a Buddhist perspective is engaging with and embodying the fluidity of knowing our own nature of emptiness, right? Knowing our own nature, our own inner freedom, sometimes we could call it. But that freedom is not a thing. It's just sort of a space where we've cut through the illusion that self is separate from other is separate from self. It's one way to say it. So this is really important, because otherwise when we talk about love and compassion, it can get really reified. It can get really fixed, right? And then we have all kinds of ideas of what is a loving act or not a loving act, or all kinds of ideas of what is a compassionate act or not a compassionate act. And for a bodhisattva, someone who actually embodies the wisdom of emptiness in their actions towards others and the way they move through the world, this is wide open. There's actually a lot of ways they can enact that activity to benefit others. So I just want to raise that up. So kind of flag that, because I would like to discuss that with you all later before we end the call. So so this relates kind of this element I'm talking about really relates to our interdependent reality. That reality is not an independent, or is not a dependent phenomena sort of in and of itself. Yet it appears that way to us. And so when we're working with these lojong slogans, we're also working with interdependence. First on a relative level, like when we're opening the heart beyond this sort of self-enclosure, and we're opening it to ourselves first, and then we're opening it to others. This is acknowledging that interdependence. This is sort of clicking into some sense that I'm not just sort of this autonomous individual on my own. Now, this is complicated because our systems, and again, this is an opinion, so you don't have to, of course, take it with a grain of salt. Our systems in the United States now are extra good at creating circumstances for us to feel autonomous and cut off from each other. And so as practitioners of the heart, as Buddhist practitioners, we almost have to work extra hard because the system is there. Sort of the system was built by us and our ancestors, and it was built on the confusion and suffering of thinking that creating a more individualized world would make us happier, right? And we can see it's not. It's making us more depressed, more anxious, right? And at the same time, from a Buddhist perspective, it doesn't allow us to live the teachings fully until we start interrupting that. And again, you're going to interrupt that in whatever way feels good to you. Some of you may be activists, you're going to interrupt it in that way. But either way, we need to interrupt it both internally and externally. Those need to happen. But from a Buddhist perspective, it does give emphasis to the internal interruption. Because if the external interruption happens without an internal shift or interruption of that individualism and this disconnect I'm going to start describing, then the external is most likely going to be co-opted by the internal aggression and or internal separation, right? So this is the predicament we're in, where we're seeing more division, right, socially on a relative level in our communities. And so it's much harder to be a universal citizen outwardly, but what we can do is cultivate that inwardly. And what I would say is, I also do believe that when we make those shifts internally, we start to act from them naturally, and that does shift the external piece by piece by piece. And of course, that can come in upheavals too, like we're having now. We're kind of having a second civil rights movement, at the moment, and we'll see, if that continues. But so when those bigger upheavals collectively come, we could take advantage of them for the benefit of all beings, right? And we have that internal shift where we're not confused, and we know how to use that well. So here, mostly I'm focusing on the relative, I want to be clear. So in a sense, on an internal level, what we're talking about here is developing friendship. All these lofty terms in Buddhism sometimes, and for me, I've always engaged in kind of like terminology and lofty words. And I heard a Tibetan Buddhist teacher use this word friendship when he was talking about Sangha in a talk. And I thought, immediately, like my Buddhist kind of like scholar brain was like, it sounds like some kind of new agey thing. And then I was like, no, he's kind of, and then I was like, friendship. Oh yeah. Because what does friendship feel like? It feels like there's trust, there's connection, there's fluidity, like things can ebb and flow. They don't have to, like sometimes our friends piss us off. Sometimes we really love being around them. We share with a friend, we share our struggles in our life. We share our triumphs, right? So a friend is kind of there as a fluid experience when it's a real friendship, when we're not just using a person, there's an exchange, right? There's a communion happening, some kind of like, not communion, what's the other word I'm thinking of? anyways. Yeah, there's an exchange, interplay. So here within sort of cultivating bodhicitta, I don't know, this is my question to you, because I'm asking myself the same question. Is it possible to cultivate authentic bodhicitta, the mind of awakening that wishes to become awakened for the benefit of all beings, aspiring for that, and engaging it through the 6 perfections, how we do it on the Buddhist path? Is it possible to do that without cultivating both an inner and an outer kind of universal friendship, right? So that's my question. I'm not sure if it's possible. And there are, I think, probably some of us, maybe not here, but other places might think we can do that, and it doesn't really matter. We can just sit in our room and do it. But I think there has to be some other elements here. That's what I've been sensing over the years in my path. So friendship here, kind of broadening it out. Of course, when we think of friendship, we think of others. We think of other people in our life, our relationships, our communities, our families. But first, for me, and when it comes to these lojong teachings, when it comes to any training we're doing of the mind, it has to start with an inner friendship. So I don't know. This is a question, and this is sensitive. I know this isn't necessarily fun to look at. Are you friends with yourself? Obviously, you don't have to answer. It's just sort of like reflecting on that. Now, I'll talk about it myself, okay? And then maybe in the Q&A, I want to hear from you. If I'm really honest, sometimes. Am I friends with myself? Sometimes. Now, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, no, I was not friends with myself, right? I disliked myself. I had a lot of low self-confidence in myself. You know, it was easy for me to get stuck in my emotional reactions, as it is now, but you know, a little bit less. It's easy, and I could be co-opted by that. And so it was hard to be friends with myself, because who I felt I was didn't feel good, right? So wherever you're at in that spectrum, this can be useful information. If we recognize, I'm not so friendly with myself, that's okay. Why? Because it can change. It's something we can work on. Like I just said, I don't feel I'm always friendly with myself, but I feel way more friendly with myself than I did 10 years ago, right? And maybe this is just something we learn as we age, as we mature. But not everybody learns that lesson. So we can see there's certain things we have to enact to do that. So today, what I wanted to kind of, you know, we have been focusing on it in the meditation sessions, but sort of to me, there's this aspect of practicing coming home into the heart, coming home into the body. So, you know, we could say there's many ways to make friends with ourselves, but for me, what I found the most beneficial and what I want to share with you as sort of a preliminary for lojong is making friends with the body, first of all. And I don't mean the physical body necessarily, like as our body ages, it actually, you know, doesn't necessarily become a friend to us. It gives us a lot of pain, right? I don't know. I feel like I get a new medical term every year of, you know, a new thing that happened, or every couple of years, you know, and I've heard that increases as I age. So, you know, a new thing. Wow, I never felt that before. Interesting. Okay. So, so it's hard when we're working with the physical body that does age and die. But here we're talking about our emotional body, our energy body, a sense of friends with our hearts, friends with a sense of, you know, allowing our full human experience to arise, fall, move, shift, our experience of pain, allowing our experience of pain to be felt, heartbreak, sensitivity, bad moods. Can we allow those to move through us? Can we allow joy to move through us? Friendship, connection, bliss, pleasure. So to me, this is all the process of making friends with myself. This is how I'm engaging it. And what this means for me is feeling, right? Like, meaning if I'm just thinking about my feeling, or thinking about what's arising in my body, or thinking about my pain, or discomfort or dissatisfaction or heartbreak or whatever's arising, I noticed for me, this is not a very friendly way to interact with myself. Have you ever been with a friend? Have you, or maybe have you ever had a friend who, you told them something very deep and, heartfelt that you were struggling with, and they just sort of like analyzed what you were feeling, like just sort of like, you know, talked at it and tried to fix your experience, right? I know I've done that to other people, which I regret as their friend, and probably I still do it sometimes. But for me, that's sort of a little bit what it's like. What do I feel when that happens to me? When someone talks to me, like, I don't feel heard. It doesn't feel connected for me. It feels disconnected. It feels intellectual and heady. I don't feel like they care. It's just sort of like they're talking at my emotion, not to me, right? And so for me, when I get in my head and I start talking to my difficult experience or judging it or trying to fix or strategize a way out of it, this is actually unfriendly. I've come to recognize this as my own sort of habits and conditioning being unfriendly to myself, right? So again, you all have your own experience and you're going to have to play with this, and maybe some of this language is newer to you. But what I'm advocating is we need to cultivate a friendliness that feels, that relates to our experience in the body as an experience where we don't have to strategize, we don't have to fix it, we don't have to change it, we don't have to try to get out of the quagmire. We just have to allow it, right? To move, like I said, to move through us, to feel it, to engage it in a way where it can be there, right? So I often think of this as sort of, I'm not a dad, but I thought, what if I had a child and they were really struggling, Would I just talk at them? Is that what they need? Yeah, maybe sometimes they want to discuss it a little bit or process it, depending on how old they are. But probably I'm just going to sit with them and I'm going to bear witness to their suffering. And I'm going to offer my love and compassion for them, sitting in the suffering with them, which doesn't feel good. If we have a child who's struggling, it also triggers us, right? If I have a friend who's struggling, it triggers me. I was in a conversation the other day where there was like a push and pull between two people, and I noticed myself getting kind of constricted because, like, on one side I wanted this friend to feel okay, on this side I wanted this friend, and then I realized I just have to let go in that situation. But letting go doesn't mean checking out. I had to just be in this environment with them and work with my own sense of pain, right? Which was that constriction, which wasn't caused by them. It was caused by my own reaction to them. So I call this coming home. And sometimes I call this healing the separation of self, right? In Buddhism, we talk about the separation of self in a larger context when we talk about ultimate truth or emptiness. But here we're just talking on a relative level, where we've lost the ability to feel. Now, if this is resonating with some of you, and you're thinking, and we're all on a spectrum of this, I just want to say, there's not like a right and wrong. There's not like, oh, now I can feel and I'm so connected. No. It's just, there's no end point here. But whatever, if you're listening to this and you're hearing this and, you're thinking, wow, this is resonating, but I don't, it's hard for me, and, or maybe I don't feel a connection to my feeling body so much, or my emotions, or know how to let them pass through me. This is okay. This is where we're at. This is, and I would say this is where we're at, and it's not our fault. We're conditioned this way. This is what the dominant culture in the United States conditions us to do. It conditions us not to feel. Because if we feel, then these systems will not function the same way. They'll collapse, right? Now, again, bringing out of our cultural dynamic, this can be also hard for people in other cultures, in other countries. This could be hard. This could have been hard for people 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But I have a suspicion we're going through kind of a special experience of this, that's sort of culminating in our modern age. That's been probably culminating for 1,000 years of colonization, where in order to colonize a people and destroy their culture and destroy their bodies, there has to be a disconnect from your own feeling, right? You have to disconnect in order to do that. And so then the mind trains itself to disconnect from the feeling. But the good news is just as much as maybe we've been conditioned to disconnect and disembody, we can reconnect. Why? Because our mind is malleable, our hearts are malleable. So there's really, really positive news here. But first thing is we have to know, and then not just know here, but feel and be like, wow, it is hard for me to be with that. And then we practice, right? We practice sitting within the rawness of our experience. I think lojong can help us to do this, and the verses we're going to talk about today can help us as well. But we have to know to orient to the feeling and to allow that space to develop within and around it. So this is kind of that first separation. And then for me, like I was alluding to in this talk about sort of working with the inner versus outer kind of worlds, this can lead then to healing the separation between self and other, right? Healing the separation communally or in the world, in how we embody and how we move through it. So this is where I think there's a large disconnect too, where this sense of disembodiment or disconnect from feeling allows us to simply demand system change, political change, just even something in our kids' school board or whatever, right? Without actually doing the internal work to stay connected to everyone as we're working to allow a positive change to happen. So this is why, for me, it's so important the inner process has to happen first, and then the outer process can happen from there. So this is the same with lojong, because if we engage these slogans and teachings with just a mentality of wishing to fix something within our sort of habits and behaviors and how we're engaging, but we're not offering the kindness to feel and allow our emotions, it doesn't work. We're going to end up hating ourselves through lojong. Okay? Sorry, a little bit heavy, but this is my experience I'm sharing with you. It might not be yours. I'm giving a little bit more experiential teachings on lojong. So I don't want to say this is your experience. I just want to, there's just some warnings that I see for us culturally and of course myself. So I said it a little bit last week, but when we make the connective tissue realign in our own experience, in our own hearts, then lojong starts to make sense. It starts to click. So obviously in our verse 2, you can see why I'm saying this maybe now as I repeat verse 2. So I want you to notice. So we're going to do something kind of a little bit more experiential. When I recite this verse, I want you to notice how it makes you feel. Don't think about it. Just notice how it makes you feel. Okay? So verse 2. Wherever I go and whomever I accompany, I shall practice seeing myself as the lowest of all and sincerely hold others dear and supreme. I'm going to say it again and just watch how it makes you feel. Wherever I go and whomever I accompany, I shall practice seeing myself as the lowest of all and sincerely hold others dear and supreme. So, interesting information, right? When we just allow Dharma to sit, and then we allow our feeling to be there. Now, I have no idea what you're feeling. You're feeling what you're feeling, right? But I know for me, what can come up with this verse is a sense of seeing myself low. And then, for me personally, I already did see myself low when I started these teachings 20 years ago. It wasn't a question, but I didn't know that. And so then it was easy to just say, oh, well then, of course, I'm going to put myself, as a doormat and allow others to be higher. And that's not really what this is saying, right? Because there's a sentient being here, we're diminishing. So if we're diminishing another, it's not lojong, it's not Mahayana Buddhism. If we're diminishing ourselves, it's also not lojong, it's not Mahayana Buddhism. So how do we do this, right? It's quite tricky here. So practice seeing myself as lowest of all and sincerely hold others dear and supreme. Let's start with the second part of this. So again, I'm already sort of talking about it. When we hear others dear and supreme, this includes self, very much so, right? And to me, this includes this element where, you know, we have to use language, so it's a little tricky. I personally would relate more to a translation that said, hold us as dear and supreme, right? So it's like this element of like less separation between self and other, less separation between, okay, now I need to hold you all supreme, you know? But the sense is like, well, we're all okay. We're all worthy, right? And so for me personally, if I don't feel my sense of worth, it's very difficult to see your sense of worth. You know what I'm saying? Can you all relate to that? Have some experience with that? It's very difficult to see the worth in someone else if we don't feel that worth here. So again, culturally, I would say these teachings were applicable to people who already felt that sense of worth. So I just want to give some generosity here to the tradition and to the translators and the verbiage, which is that I think they were intending these teachings for someone who already was quite healthy with themselves, right? And then we're working with the often flip side of low self-confidence, which can be arrogance and hubris, right? Putting ourselves, you know, not knowing what to do because we don't feel home. We don't feel at home in our hearts. So we have to always put ourselves forward. We have to always present ourselves as first, or we're the best, and we have to compete, right? And this is what I was saying in our systems now. It's very challenging with lojong because almost daily in our work, we're in order to just live, to make money, not even be successful, like be famous, just to make money, we have to diminish ourselves to be competitive and all these things, right? So it's very tricky. I just want to point that out. So what this verse is really implying is working with the mind that gets stuck in or caught in strictly cherishing ourselves alone, right? So now we're kind of going to the Dharma, we're leveling up. So we have the relative kind of, I would say just secular side, where it's working with our own humanity, our own hearts, healing that, which is a spiritual practice as well, but it also can be secular. Coming home to our hearts, learning how to do that in the body and the feelings and engaging that as a practice. But then how that connects now to understanding when we're kind of cocooning into our enclosure of self without this inner connection and relationship with others, we're not developing bodhicitta. We're kind of going the opposite direction. And it becomes very difficult to awaken. So again, when we take the morality out of this, which is, I'm going to end in a minute, but I want to mention this. We can read this as a very moralistic thing, but it's not. So I just want to mention that because some of our lenses in the West can come through quite a Judeo-Christian lens. Buddhism isn't Judeo-Christian, didn't come from any of those things. It's a very different lens. And so, you know, this isn't a moral thing either of being a good or bad person because we're either self-cherishing or not self-cherishing. It's a matter of suffering or happiness. It's a matter of awakening or being stuck. Because when we widen out from that home, so we've got our home, let's just assume we've got our home, raw, we're able to allow vulnerability, it can move through us, suffering can come, we have some space around that in our own experience. Then that starts this interplay of reflection of others, which means kind of like lowering our expectations around our own happiness a little bit and forwarding the happiness of others because we're already joyful. We've got enough. It's like our plate is full and now we can share. That's really where this is coming from. It's not putting ourselves lower literally. It's like we're full so we can share. And then what we do is we work with that dynamic or that habit to put ourselves first. And then we start to put others first and to work with this interplay, like I said, this universal citizenship of loving kindness and compassion. And then in verse 3, it says, in all actions, I shall examine my mind in the moment an unsubdued thought arises, endangering myself and others, I shall face and avert it. And this is a process of that universal citizenship. If we're not acknowledging our patterns of aversion and craving, right? And we're not acknowledging how those are self-serving in a way that's causing suffering for ourselves and denying this universal citizenship and community and friendship, then we're going to continue to suffer from those. you know, not even talking about like who we are in the world. So not even making it a moral thing. We're just going to suffer. We're not going to experience well-being. So this is that other level of it, which is like, how am I engaging in my behaviors with others? Am I cultivating generosity? Am I cultivating warmth towards others? Am I cultivating diligence to watching the minds as they arise, and of course cultivating love towards myself, but also diligence to work with difficult emotions or destructive emotions, or kleshas we say in Sanskrit. So I'm going to stop here and just open it up a little bit, but I just wanted to, we'll start again with verse 3. I'd like to kind of recapitulate every teaching in the last verse, but I have some ideas of sort of how to work with antidotes to afflictive emotions from the Buddhist teachings. We can talk about that. But anyways, yeah, if you all have anything, we got a few minutes just to open it up. I'm curious what some of these questions brought up for you, especially, you know. And of course, if you have questions for me, if something was confusing or you didn't understand it, and just to put it out there as part of my ethical policy when I teach Dharma, I'm not right. So you can challenge me too. You're totally welcome to. It can actually be quite good for developing Dharma in our hearts too.
Hi,
Yeah,
Scott. This
Hey.
is Adam.
Hey, Adam.
What you just said struck a chord in terms of being right, because I've been having very difficult conversations with friends about things like Black Lives Matter and, you know, racism in America. And it's not always helpful to be right. So I find myself constantly almost analyzing everything I say to determine whether I'm acting from a desire to be helpful or a desire to be right. And sometimes those things coincide, but sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
It's really challenging.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. This is probably one of my things I struggle with the most, in the sense that in my relationships, I think I've what's the word? Like, I've brought in first rightness versus connection to my detriment. And of course, maybe harm I've created, you know, through that. And so that's the question I ask myself before I meet someone now, or teach, like, you know, because I'm engaging, and there's also some ethics to how, when we're in a teaching role or a leadership role, how to do that. But so I ask myself the question, like, do I want to be right in this experience or connected? Because I don't think they can happen together, you know? And so it's just that, you know, I love it, Adam. Thanks for that, you know, raising that up, because I think it comes back to this coming home practice that I was talking about, of just sort of, you know, for me, that's all about acknowledging, well, what do I need to be right from? Like, what's in my body right now? What am I feeling that needs that for validation, or needs that to feel as I maybe have the confused idea that I'm going to get connected through being right. Like, what's that coming from? And so, you know, we all have our work to do in that, to find that. And then once I know what that is, which for me, it's usually a validation. Like, usually it has something around that of like not feeling heard or validated, which is one of my wounds. And so what then I'm doing is essentially holding that with compassion. So it's like, again, about personal friendship. I become a good friend of myself, where it's like, okay, if I'm a good friend of myself here, before I even engage the other person, oh man, there's a much stronger possibility I can be a good friend with them. So wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for raising that up. You know, and there's this other sort of sidebar to it, where it's like, I don't think anyone stop being racist, like bigoted racist. I'm not just talking like, you know, unconscious racism or unconscious bias, bigoted racist because someone, you know, told them they're wrong, they're racist. You know, it doesn't work that way. I mean, there's this wonderful man, there's a really short documentary on YouTube of a Black man, I think in Louisiana or the South, who he collects he basically works with KKK members, and he has like a collection of KKK robes, actually, that he's like you know, that he soars proudly as people he's like, you know, in relationship with them, he's helped to broaden their view. And I watched him with people, and he didn't, I don't think he started with telling people they're wrong. He just became a friend to people, and they start to see, oh, there's a black man who's a really good person. And then that bigoted racism couldn't hold up in the face of an authentic person, showing them like, hey, there's no reason to hate this person or this group of people, right? So yeah, I mean, anyways, yeah. Some of that's more obvious, but thanks, Adam. Yeah. Anything else on your minds? Hearts?
Hi, Scott.
Hey, Claire.
I'm new this week. I haven't met you yet. But I just wanted
Nice to meet
share
you.
a story that just from yesterday in my life that connected to what you said, I think, about being a citizen, being a community citizen. I go on a walk to a certain park and back most days. And I saw yesterday on my way to the park, a guy that was, I think it looked pretty clear he had spent the night in the park. He was in a wheelchair, and I couldn't tell if he had fallen out of the chair or he was just off the chair while he was resting on the ground. It was still pretty early and pretty cool. I passed him. We made eye contact. I said good morning. He was smoking a cigarette and looked pretty relaxed. And then when I came back the same way, a few minutes later, he was up on his chair, or he was behind his chair, you know, walking it. And I realized I could see his leg was really, really messed up. He had a pretty major wound on one of his legs, looked pretty infected and pretty awful. And but I passed him. I said good morning again. And then I went a different way for a few minutes, and long story short, about 5 minutes later, I was approaching him from behind, and I realized he was walking his chair empty on this bad wounded leg down the street in the same direction I was going. And in my mind, I was thinking, you know, I wasn't thinking I was going to stop. I was thinking I needed to get home to get on a call, and I wish I had worn my mask, and I wish he was wearing a mask, or maybe I'd help him. And then as I was passing him, he turned. We happened to make eye contact, and it was just very clear at that moment that I couldn't pass him. I didn't want to pass him. So I said, "Hey, do you need a push for a little while?" And he said, "Sure." So I pushed him probably for about 8 blocks. And we talked. He told me his name, and I asked him about his leg. And, you know, we passed lots of people who were in this, you know, pretty white, pretty privileged neighborhood. And everyone's kind of looking at me with gratitude, like, oh, this woman just stopped to help this person. And I thought, oh man, I'm feeling so much relief right now, because it was like, in that moment, my heart overruled my mind. And it was just a small 10-minute thing that I could do, but this guy was like overjoyed with gratitude because he was really struggling. And that's just this, like, you know, little thing, but it's been coming up to me today how much relief I felt, like, oh, because I could feel that if I went home, I would have been regretting not stopping. So it's just nice to at least have allowed myself to not think through that situation and just feel through it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. It's amazing how much really small things can be big, big things for other people. It's really, really amazing. Yeah. So we're at 12:30. I just want to acknowledge that. So maybe what we will do is stop here, and we'll just recite a brief dedication. But just before we do that, as Mary's pulling it up, I just want to acknowledge all you. Just thank you, and thanks for sharing your hearts, and you know, even if you didn't say anything the whole time, thanks for being here and engaging with this. Just as kind of like something to take home a little bit. I mean, I think it was hopefully clear in what we talked about already today and discussed, but really like our work is actually is a lot of it's internal work at this point, you know, and it's actually the harder work for most of us. But just as Claire pointed out, that also doesn't mean we have to wait for the internal work to be done to help. You know, my teacher Soner Rinpoche has a wonderful story where he was driving in I'll tell the short version. He was in a Jeep going from a hotel in Delhi to the airport, and there was a small boy at the on the side of the road, you know, motioning for water, and he had just a bottle of water there because the hotel put it in the car, and he kind of gave, you know, he was thinking, he wasn't feeling like a big compassion welling for this kid or like a big bodhicitta in this moment, like I'm going to do this for the benefit of, you know, to awaken for the benefit of all. But he was like, he still did it, you know, of course, just because that's the action coming from our nature. Just, he didn't have to think, it just happened, right? So sort of this idea that we are working on these bigger perspectives of bodhicitta, but in the short term we do the little things, or the not so little things, depending on what they are, right? But I think it's a tricky one because sometimes the internal stuff is harder, and we do the external things because we're trying to avoid the internal. So I want to raise that up. Yeah, at least in my life, that's how it's been sometimes, right? So, yeah, what's the word? Treasure all of you, yeah, doing the work. Okay, so we'll just recite in English, I think, the first two dedications. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you. Thanks for sharing today and practicing and engaging. I hope you can come next week. I don't have too much homework. Maybe read the text, you know, think about this. Like, you notice how like we took a verse and we sat with it. Do that. Like just recite it internally to yourself and then sit with it. Don't try to think about it. Don't try to like at first, just sort of let it sit. I find when I work with the Dharma with more curiosity, dropping the need to know immediately, a lot more comes out, because lojong is not hard to understand. It's more we have to feel through it. And like maybe something came out in this reading today of that verse where we talked about putting ourselves lower than others. What came out for you? Do some processing around that too. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mary.